In a modest town where routines rarely shifted and familiar faces colored the streets, there stood a white house with deep red shutters. Neatly placed at the corner of a sun-dappled lane, it belonged to a family whose name was spoken with quiet respect. They weren't the richest on the block, but their presence carried weight. The father dealt in business across neighboring towns. The mother, an educator, commanded respect in both school corridors and community gatherings. Their schedules were often tight, their movements predictable, always in and out, seldom home for long. Inside that house, symmetry ruled. Furniture arranged with intent. Pictures framed in perfect alignment. Walls silent, floors spotless. It was the kind of home that ran like a machine, well-oiled, efficient, guarded. The two sons of the family, nearly adults by age but still boys in many ways, were quiet by nature. Neither brought attention to themselves. They attended school, returned on time, and rarely mingled with others beyond necessity. Their silence wasn't seen as strange. It was simply accepted. The parents were known to leave town for work. During those periods, the house didn't fall into chaos. It stayed just as composed, just as quiet. Meals remained on schedule, chores completed, and no outward sign of disruption ever appeared. The community saw this as a sign of good upbringing. Discipline, they called it. Responsibility, even. Few noticed how isolated the brothers really were. To keep the house running, the family employed help. That help came in the form of Alia, a soft-spoken young woman with a gentle presence and eyes that reflected more kindness than she ever voiced aloud. Alia had worked for them for almost a year. She cooked, cleaned, and moved about the home like someone who belonged but never intruded. Her presence brought warmth to the otherwise cold perfection of the house. She had no history of complaints, no reason for concern. She was trusted. From a distance, the home looked like a model of order. It sat proud under the sun, framed by trimmed hedges and a narrow path of stone leading up to a firm front door. But beyond the back, behind a thin stretch of grass and a neglected garden bed, the land dipped slightly, just enough to go unnoticed. The terrain there was uneven, hidden by overgrowth and rarely touched by sunlight. It wasn't part of the property that drew attention. It simply existed, forgotten, quiet. The house never raised suspicion. No one imagined it would. But on one particular afternoon, everything changed. Subtly, silently, and without warning. The family left as they often did. The brothers stayed behind as usual. Alia remained, as expected. And then, the air shifted. Nothing loud, nothing sudden. Just a gradual unraveling that no one would see until it had already passed. By the time neighbors began to notice the absence of movement in the kitchen windows, the stillness had settled into every corner of that perfect house. But stillness doesn't always mean peace. Alia was only 24 years old, but she had a calmness about her that made her seem older. She had a warm smile that could make anyone feel comfortable, and a quiet presence that never demanded attention. She was the kind of person who blended into a room, not because she wanted to be invisible, but because she preferred to listen rather than speak. Alia was simple. She wasn't looking for fame or recognition. What she wanted most was peace and stability, things that seemed hard to find in the busy world outside the walls of the house. She had come from a small village nearby, far from the hustle of the city, where things moved slowly and life was simpler. She had taken the job with the family because it offered a steady income, something she'd been looking for since she was young. The opportunity to work in a well-kept house with a reputable family seemed perfect. There, she found the chance to build a future, to save money, and to make her life a little more predictable. She was good at cooking and keeping things in order, and the family was kind to her. It was the kind of job she could settle into. People who knew her said that Alia was a quiet soul, always soft-spoken and respectful. She didn't ask for much. She didn't complain. Her only goal was to do her work and live in peace. Neighbors who occasionally saw her walking to and from the house would often say she always had a warm smile, even if it was a little shy. She never seemed rushed, never seemed upset. Her days were filled with cleaning, cooking, and making sure everything ran smoothly for the family. She had a way of taking care of things that felt natural, as if she had done it all her life. Even the brothers, though they were quiet themselves, found a certain ease with Alia. She wasn't like most people they knew. Alia never tried to control or judge them. She simply treated them with kindness, never raising her voice or demanding attention. If they needed something, she would quietly go about making it happen, without fuss or complaint. It wasn't that the brothers were particularly close to her, but there was a comfort in her calm presence. The house was more peaceful when she was there, and they appreciated her for that. Alia wasn't just a worker to the family. She was part of the routine. She greeted the parents warmly when they arrived home, and they would smile and ask how things had been while they were away. She never said much about her personal life. In fact, most of the time she didn't talk about herself at all. She listened when the parents spoke, nodded when necessary, and always did her job quietly and without trouble. The family trusted her, and she had earned that trust with her steady presence and reliable work. But Alia's life was more than just work. Though she never spoke much about her dreams, she had them. She dreamed of a future where she could build her own home, somewhere peaceful, far from the pressures of the world. She dreamed of being independent, of finding a place where she could truly feel at peace. But those dreams would never be realized. No one could have known that the kindness Alia showed every day would be the very thing that would make her a target. As the days passed in the house, Alia continued her work with a gentle spirit. But a darker shift was beginning to take place, something that no one could see coming. The brothers, who had once been content with their quiet lives, were changing. No one could have predicted that the quiet, reliable woman they trusted would soon become entangled in something far beyond her control. The two brothers, Aaron and Ben, had always been seen as quiet, reserved young men. Both in their late teens, they were hardly noticed by most of the town. Aaron, the older of the two, was 19 while Ben was 17. They both kept to themselves, never causing trouble, and always stayed out of the spotlight. They attended the local school, did their work, and were often described as model students by their teachers. But even though they seemed normal on the surface, there was something about them that didn't sit right with those who paid attention. Aaron, the older brother, had always been more intense. He often kept to his room, reading or playing games for hours, rarely engaging with others. He didn't have many friends, but when he did talk, it was often about things that didn't make sense to most people. He could talk for hours about things like philosophy or history, yet he showed no interest in making personal connections. To some, his quiet nature was just the way he was. To others, though, there was something strange about his lack of warmth. He never laughed much, never smiled without reason. His expressions were distant, almost cold. Ben, the younger brother, seemed to follow Aaron wherever he went. He was quieter than his older sibling, almost invisible at times. It was as if Ben was living in Aaron's shadow. While Aaron had his own space and his own interests, Ben was always attached to him, often copying Aaron's behavior or opinions without thinking for himself. Ben had the same coldness in his demeanor but seemed even more detached from the world around him. It was as if he was afraid to show who he really was, hiding behind his brother's actions. Though neither Aaron nor Ben had many friends, they didn't seem to mind. The few times they interacted with others, it was in small, almost forced conversations. People who knew them said they were polite, but distant. They never shared much about their lives, and even when they did, their words felt empty. Their classmates often found them to be aloof, like they were somehow above everyone else. They didn't laugh at jokes, didn't engage in the gossip that came with high school life. Instead, they stayed on the sidelines, almost observing life from afar, not participating in it. There were some whispers, though, especially from people who lived near them. A few neighbors started to notice strange things about the brothers. They weren't violent or openly rude, but there were moments that felt off. Aaron would sometimes stare at people in a way that made them feel uncomfortable, and Ben, though quiet, always seemed to follow his older brother's every move. It was as if Aaron held some kind of control over him, a control that no one fully understood. There were also rumors about their behavior in the past. Some of their teachers had quietly mentioned that Aaron had been reprimanded a few times for inappropriate behavior. He had made strange comments in class, had written essays that seemed oddly focused on darker subjects that no one could quite explain. It wasn't enough to get him in trouble, but it made some people uneasy. As for Ben, he was never in trouble, but it was clear that he never spoke up for himself. It was as though he was content to live in his brother's world, doing whatever Aaron told him to do without question. One neighbor, who had seen the boys grow up, would later say, "There was always something off about them. They never really fit in. They stayed to themselves, sure, but it was more than that. It was like they didn't understand the world the way everyone else did. We never imagined that something like this could happen. But looking back, maybe we should have seen it coming." The brothers seemed like an odd pair. No one truly understood them, and no one had ever tried to get close enough to figure them out. They kept their distance from others, but there were signs. Signs that something deeper lay beneath the surface. They weren't just quiet. They were isolated in a way that went beyond simple introversion. And the more people looked, the more they began to wonder if the brothers ever truly saw the world the way others did. The connection between Aaron and Ben was unlike anything most people had seen before. They were more than just siblings, they were two halves of the same whole. Where one went, the other followed. Where one spoke, the other listened, but never answered. It was as if they were joined by something stronger than blood, something darker, something that no one could see. Their behavior might have been overlooked by many, but for those who paid attention, the cracks were starting to show. People began to wonder how long it would be before the brothers' distance from the world would grow into something bigger, something that no one could ignore. Started like any other day. The parents, as they often did, announced that they were heading out of town. Their business was taking them away, and they would be gone for a few days. It was routine for the family. The brothers had grown used to the absence, and Alia, their trusted cook, was always there to take care of the home in their stead. She was used to their comings and goings, and the house always ran smoothly when they were away. It was simple, predictable. The morning passed without issue. Alia was up early, preparing breakfast as usual. The brothers, silent as always, ate their meals quietly before retreating to their separate rooms. Nothing was out of the ordinary. No strange looks exchanged. No tension in the air. Just another day in a house where silence was more common than conversation. By midday, the sun was high in the sky, casting long shadows across the yard. The house was still and calm, the only sounds coming from the soft hum of the kitchen as Alia continued with her chores. The brothers stayed in their rooms, no different from how they had been all morning. There was no sign of anything unusual, but something was changing, something that no one could see yet. Then, as the afternoon wore on, a heavy silence began to settle in. It wasn't the quiet of a normal afternoon, where everyone went about their day without speaking. This was a deeper silence, one that felt thicker, more suffocating. The house seemed to hold its breath. The air felt still, as if time itself had paused. At exactly 2 p.m., the stillness grew. No sounds of footsteps, no voices, no sounds of doors opening or closing. The house was eerily quiet, with nothing to break the calm. Even the normal sounds, the clink of dishes in the kitchen, the light tapping of the brothers' feet as they paced about, had stopped. The minutes dragged on. 2:30 p.m. Still silent. No sign of movement. 3 p.m. The house, as it always had been, was now completely still. But it wasn't the kind of stillness that was peaceful. It was unsettling. The kind of silence that makes you want to look over your shoulder, just to make sure you're not alone. It felt wrong, like something was waiting to happen, though no one could say exactly what. The camera slowly zoomed in on the house, the once peaceful home now feeling distant, cold, and strange. The walls, once so familiar, now seemed to close in. As the image grew closer, a low, ominous sound crept into the background. The subtle noise of creaking wood, the faintest whisper of wind, enough to build tension without fully breaking the silence. The sound echoed in the viewer's ears, pulling them deeper into the story. The clock on the wall ticked, marking the passing of time. but the house remained as still as it had been in the morning. Nothing was moving. No one was speaking. The day stretched on, but it no longer felt normal. The quiet had become something else. The longer the silence lasted, the more unsettling it became. At 4 p.m., the house remained unchanged. The brothers hadn't left their rooms. Alia hadn't emerged from the kitchen. The clock on the wall ticked louder in the empty room, as if reminding everyone that something was off. Something was missing from the air. Something was waiting. The tension was building, and no one could have guessed it then. But by the time night fell, the quiet house would never be the same again. The afternoon had slipped into evening, and the house was now completely silent. The brothers, Aaron and Ben, who had stayed locked in their rooms for hours, finally came out. Their movements were slow, almost calculated. They met in the hallway, sharing a glance that no one else could see, a look that said more than words ever could. They didn't speak, but their eyes told the story. Something was about to change. Alia, still in the kitchen, had no idea what was unfolding just a few feet away. She was busy preparing dinner, her mind focused on the task at hand. She had worked in the house for so long that she knew every corner, every sound, every routine. Nothing ever disrupted the rhythm of the day, but tonight, something felt different. There was an unease in the air, a shift that she couldn't explain. The brothers moved toward the kitchen. They didn't rush, their steps heavy but deliberate. As they approached, the shadows in the hall seemed to stretch longer than usual, as if they were closing in on the house, on her. Alia heard the sound of footsteps, but when she turned around, it was too late. Aaron was the first to speak, his voice calm but distant. "We couldn't help it. She was too beautiful." His words hung in the air like a chilling whisper. He said it as if it was the most natural thing in the world. There was no hesitation in his tone, no regret, just a strange sort of finality. Ben stood behind his brother, silent as ever. His eyes were fixed on Alia, but there was no warmth in them. It was as if he, too, was trapped in the moment, caught between what was right and what was happening now. His hands hung by his sides, unmoving. Alia froze, her breath catching in her throat. Her heart began to race as the weight of the situation hit her. She tried to speak, tried to ask what was happening, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, a growing sense of fear filled her chest, spreading through her like a cold wave. She turned to move away, but Aaron grabbed her arm, his grip tight and unyielding. The force of it shocked her, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. She tried to pull away, but it was no use. She struggled, kicking, twisting in his grasp, but he was too strong. Ben remained still, his eyes never leaving her face, watching as if this was something he had already seen before. Alia's mind raced. She pleaded, her voice shaking with fear. "Please, please let me go." Her words came out in frantic gasps, but they seemed to have no effect. The brothers didn't flinch. There was no hesitation, no mercy in their eyes. She tried to scream, but the sound was muffled by Aaron's hand covering her mouth. Her body jerked in his grasp as she fought, her nails digging into his skin. But with each movement, the struggle grew weaker. She could feel her strength fading, her body growing tired. The fear in her eyes was now the only thing that spoke, but it was clear that the fight was slipping away from her. It happened quickly after that. One moment, she was struggling to break free, and the next, the room was silent. The brothers had done what they had come to do, and the house, once filled with the sounds of life, now stood still. Alia's body lay motionless. The only movement in the room was the faint, shallow rise and fall of her chest. The silence that followed was deafening. The weight of the moment seemed to crush the air out of the room. It wasn't just the end of a life. It was the end of everything that had once been normal, once been safe. The brothers stood there for a long time, their eyes fixed on Alia's still form. There was no remorse, no sign of regret in their faces, just emptiness. The house was silent, and in that silence, everything else faded away. The noise of the outside world, the clamor of life, all of it disappeared. It was just them, the two brothers, and the heavy silence that surrounded them. No words were spoken, Nothing needed to be said. After the silence settled, panic crept in. Aaron and Ben, once so calm, now found themselves filled with an overwhelming sense of urgency. Their bodies moved in haste, but their minds were still clouded with a strange calmness. They knew what they had to do, but they didn't know how to face what they had just done. It was as if the gravity of their actions hadn't fully hit them yet. Without a word, they went to work. Aaron dragged Alia's lifeless body across the floor, his grip tight on her arms. Ben, still silent, followed behind, looking over his shoulder every few seconds, as if expecting someone to walk in and stop them. The fear was creeping in, but they continued, moving like shadows in the dark corners of the house. They made their way outside, the body heavy between them. The night had already begun to fall, casting long shadows across the yard. The house was still. There was no one around to see what they were doing. They quickly dragged Alia to the valley behind the house, the place where no one ever went. The moon hung low in the sky, its light casting an eerie glow over the fresh soil. They dug quickly, the earth giving way with each shovel full. The sound of the shovel slicing through the ground was loud in the quiet night. It was almost as if they were trying to bury not just Alia, but the weight of their guilt. With each scoop of soil, they got closer to hiding what they had done, to hiding themselves from the world. The fresh soil soon covered her body, the grave now a shallow secret that only they knew. The brothers stood over it for a moment, their faces hidden in the dark. The air was thick with unspoken words. There was no satisfaction in the task they had just completed, only a growing sense of unease. When they finished, the night felt colder. The valley, once so peaceful, now felt like a graveyard for something far deeper than just a body. The brothers wiped their hands on their clothes, their eyes darting to the house, then back to the freshly turned earth. They walked back to the house, trying to act normal, but the tension was undeniable. There was no turning back now. They had buried their secret, but they hadn't buried the fear that gnawed at them. The next morning, as the sun rose, it was as if nothing had changed. The house was quiet, the air still. The brothers went through their normal routine, pretending nothing had happened. They moved as if they hadn't just taken a life. They didn't speak of it, didn't acknowledge it. There was no sign of the panic, no sign of the fear they had felt the night before. They simply acted as if everything was the same. When their parents returned that afternoon, they acted surprised to see them. There were no questions, no strange looks. The parents never suspected a thing. The house, the brothers, everything seemed normal. The parents asked how things had gone, how the house had been without them. Aaron answered first, his voice steady. "Everything's fine," he said almost too calmly. "Just a normal day." Ben didn't say anything, but he didn't need to. His silence was enough. The parents didn't question them further. They assumed everything had been as it always had been, just another quiet week in a house that had always seemed safe. But beneath the surface, the brothers were not the same. The lie they had just told hung heavily between them, a lie they would carry with them for as long as they could. The tension in the air was thick, but no one noticed. No one could see it. The camera slowly zoomed out from the house, the steady sound of a heartbeat growing louder, the tension rising. The peacefulness of the home felt fragile now, as if it was just a mask for something darker that lay beneath. The brothers had covered up their crime, but they hadn't escaped the consequences. The quiet house, the smiling parents. They couldn't hide the truth forever. And in the silence of the night, that truth began to creep closer. Days passed since Alia's disappearance. At first, there were no questions. Life in the house returned to its routine, and the brothers acted as if nothing had changed. But soon, the quiet started to unravel. Alia's absence did not go unnoticed. The neighbors began to wonder. They had known her for months, seen her working in the house, always so polite and respectful. She had never been the type to just leave without a word. One neighbor, Mrs. Peters, was the first to speak up. "She never left without telling anyone," Mrs. Peters said in a soft, worried voice. "She wouldn't have just disappeared like that. Something's wrong." Her words seemed simple, but they were enough to stir something in the town. Soon, Others began to ask where Alia had gone. People started to question the brothers. Had they seen her? Did they know anything? Aaron and Ben were quick to dismiss the concern. She left on her own, Aaron said, his voice casual, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. But even as he spoke, something felt off in his words. There was no urgency, no worry. He acted as though it was just another normal day. Ben, on the other hand, remained silent. His eyes shifted when people asked about Alia, and he avoided making eye contact with anyone for too long. The suspicion in the air began to build, but no one could put their finger on it. The police were called in when the neighbors couldn't find Alia and when her family grew worried. The investigation started quietly, with a few officers knocking on doors and speaking to the brothers. The questions seemed innocent at first. Did they know where she was? Had they seen anything unusual? But as the officers spoke to the brothers, they began to notice small inconsistencies in their stories. Aaron's version of events kept changing. One moment, he said Alia had left to visit a friend, and the next, he claimed she had gone to a relative's house. But no one could confirm this. Alia hadn't contacted anyone to let them know where she was going, and the people she supposedly visited hadn't seen her. Ben's silence didn't help matters. He simply nodded when questioned, offering vague responses. It was clear something wasn't adding up. The police decided to dig deeper. The investigation continued, with officers searching the property and speaking to anyone who might know more. It wasn't long before the police found something that raised even more suspicion. Alia's personal belongings, left behind in her room, untouched. There was no sign that she had packed to leave or planned on going anywhere. Then the discovery came. While the search team scoured the valley behind the house, one officer stumbled upon something hidden beneath the soil, freshly turned earth. It didn't take long to realize what they had found. The body of Alia, buried just yards away from the house, was uncovered. The news spread quickly, and the town was left in shock. People gathered around the police cars, murmuring in disbelief. How could this happen in their small, peaceful town? How could something so terrible happen so close to home? The emotional toll on Alia's family was devastating. They couldn't believe what had happened to her. How could someone do this to such a kind, gentle woman? Her family was left to mourn, but the grief was tangled with the terrifying realization that those responsible were the very people they had trusted. The police brought the brothers in for questioning once again. This time, the tension was thicker. The pressure was building. One of the brothers began to crack. Aaron, the older of the two, started to show signs of breaking. His cool demeanor faltered when the officers pushed him with questions. He couldn't avoid the truth anymore. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "It just happened. We couldn't control it." The confession was chilling. It wasn't just the words. It was the emptiness in his voice, the lack of real remorse. It was as though he had detached himself from the reality of what he had done. The brothers had buried the truth, but it was finally surfacing, and with it, the horror of what they had hidden. The police moved quickly after the brothers' confession. Charges were filed against Aaron and Ben. It was clear that this wasn't just a simple case of a missing person. The truth had come to light, and it was far darker than anyone had imagined. The town was in shock. No one could believe what had happened. These two brothers, who had once been seen as quiet and somewhat ordinary, were now at the center of a horrifying crime. The news spread like wildfire, and soon, the entire community was gripped with disbelief. The thought that someone they knew could commit such a crime left everyone feeling uneasy. How could something so terrible happen right in their own neighborhood? Public outrage quickly followed. People who had known Aaron and Ben felt betrayed. They questioned how they had not seen the signs before. Was there something they had missed? Neighbors, friends, and even family members couldn't wrap their heads around what had happened. How could two young men, who had seemed so normal, do something so cruel? The trial became the talk of the town. It was impossible to avoid the conversations about the case. The courtroom was packed with people eager to see justice served. The brothers sat in silence as the testimonies began. Witnesses spoke about their interactions with the family. Some mentioned the quiet tension in the house. Others recalled small, strange behaviors from the brothers. But no one could have ever predicted what would unfold in that courtroom. One by one, witnesses took the stand. Alia's family shared their pain, explaining how they had lost not just a beloved family member, but a part of their world. They spoke of the kindness she had shown to everyone, and the emptiness they now felt in her absence. Their words were powerful, and they left the courtroom in tears. The pain of her loss was still fresh, and the truth of how she had been taken from them hit hard. But it wasn't just the emotional testimonies that grabbed attention. The prosecution painted a clear picture of what had happened in that house. They presented evidence, showing how the brothers had tried to cover their tracks, how they had lied about what happened to Alia, and how they thought they could hide the truth. But as the prosecutor put it, they thought they could hide a body, but not the truth. The defense tried to argue that the brothers weren't fully responsible for their actions, citing possible mental health issues and a troubled childhood. But the community had already made up their mind. They could no longer see these brothers as victims of circumstance. They were seen for what they were, the ones who had taken a life and then tried to bury it. When the verdict was read, the courtroom was silent. There was no gasping, no dramatic outbursts. It was as if the air itself had frozen in that moment. The brothers were found guilty, but the real question was what would happen next. What was the proper punishment for what they had done? The judge took time before announcing the sentencing. The crowd waited in tense silence. Finally, the sentence was handed down. The brothers would spend many years behind bars with no chance of parole for a long time. For the people of the town, it wasn't enough to bring Alia back. But it was justice, at least in their eyes. The trial left the community shaken. It had been a harsh reminder of how something so terrible could happen in the most unlikely places. The town would never be the same again. And as the courtroom doors closed, it was clear that the story of the brothers and Alia's tragic fate would haunt the town for years to come. The weeks following the trial were a blur of emotions for Alia's family. The pain of losing her had not gone away, and now, the reality of what had happened settled in. The family had trusted the brothers, opened their doors to them, and welcomed them into their home. But now, they had to face the ugly truth of what had occurred. Her parents were devastated. There was no easy way to accept that their daughter had been taken by the very people they had trusted. The grief was overwhelming, and in the quiet moments, they wondered if they had missed any signs. Could they have done something to prevent this? Could they have noticed the darkness that had been hiding in those brothers all along? But there were no answers to those questions. No amount of regret or self-blame would bring Alia back. The family had to learn to live with the pain of their loss, a pain that would never go away. The community, too, was left reeling. They had always thought of their town as a peaceful, safe place where nothing terrible ever happened. But now everyone felt vulnerable. No one could shake the fear that had settled into their hearts. How could someone they had known for so long be capable of such a thing? How could they have trusted those boys? People began to second-guess their relationships, question the people around them. The bonds that once seemed so strong were now viewed through a lens of suspicion. There was a deep sense of betrayal that lingered. The quiet town, once full of comfort and familiarity, was now filled with unease and doubt. Alia's disappearance and the shocking events that followed had changed everything. Safety, trust, these things no longer felt as certain. Parents looked at their children differently, questioning who they could trust, who they should keep close. Neighbors, once friendly and open, became wary of each other, hesitant to let anyone too close. For Alia's parents, the pain was compounded by the deep regret they felt when they thought about the boys. The brothers had always seemed so normal. They had been a part of the community for years, and Alia's family had never imagined anything like this could happen. The shock was unbearable. They felt betrayed not just by the brothers but by their own instincts. How could they have known that the kindness the brothers had shown was hiding something so dark? The aftermath left lasting scars. The sense of betrayal and sadness that hung in the air would never go away. The story of what happened to Alia became a lesson for the community, one that would linger in their minds for years to come. It changed how they viewed their own safety, how they trusted the people around them. The town would never be the same again. The tragedy had left a permanent mark, one that would take a long time to heal, if it ever could. Alia came to serve. She was kind, soft-spoken, and had big dreams for her life. She never expected that one fateful day would end her story. She had trusted the people around her, believed that she was safe in their home. But her life was taken, not by a stranger, but by those she least expected. Her journey, which began with a simple job, ended tragically and left a community shattered. It's a painful reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers lie closer to home than we realize. Evil doesn't always wear a mask. It hides in plain sight, often where we feel the safest. She came to serve. She never left alive. These words hold the weight of the sorrow and betrayal that followed. It's a tragic reality we must face, that people we trust can sometimes carry darkness within them. Was this a crime of passion? Or was it something deeper, something darker that had been lurking all along? The answers may never be fully clear. But the pain of the loss is undeniable, and the ripples of that day will be felt for a long time. As the story ends, remember Alia, a life taken too soon, a light extinguished. Her name, her age, 24 years old, will remain in our hearts. She came with hopes, dreams, and kindness. Her memory deserves to live on,